welcome to our Board of Commissioner meeting for October 6, 2021. We actually have two items on our agenda, what to do with the Eagle defense and Ben Simmons. Ooh, wrong agenda. We have the Public Works Committee and a Finance Committee, and we will start right away with the Finance Committee and recognize its co-chair, Vice President Gavin.
Thank you, President Bernheim. We have the Finance Committee, some of them procedural, but the first is continuation of our Board of Commissioners budget workshop that we held a few weeks ago. And I believe our CFO, Eric Traub, has a short presentation to make before we have some discussion on a couple of items that still are outstanding for our staff. It's all yours.
Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Is everyone hearing me? Getting here. Okay. All right. We have a few items we want to kind of go through coming out of the budget workshop. What I'm going to do with each item is I'm going to basically go through the item and then pause and have board discussion, get policy direction and such, and then move forward because they're all kind of separate and distinct. So the first one is regarding the topic of a $15 an hour minimum pay for any township employee. This is basically for the part-time seasonal staff. It was discussed at the budget workshop. You have an attachment in your packets which looks at all part-time salaries and shows you those respective hourly pays, current hourly pays. There can be ranges if there's different employee or different people within the same classification. You also see some odd situations, like there's some wide ranges in libraries, but if there's a part-time librarian who maybe on a Sunday is basically the person in charge of the library, they're paid at a higher rate. So there are reasons behind those. Outside of Parks and Recreation, the minimum pay is currently $10 an hour, and there are a good amount of part-time positions that exceed the $15 an hour rate. Please be aware that what is shown for Parks and Recreation is current rates. As Director Heller said, and I did bring reinforcements if there's any specific questions tonight in the form of Parks and Rec, our Director of Libraries, and our HR Director. Donna proposed across the board, so all those rates you see for Parks and Rec will go up by $2 an hour beginning in 2022. And given what we've seen in the marketplace, there is a need to be competitive. We have done that throughout my time here with these part-time positions. We increased the part-time refuse collector and truck driver rates a couple of years ago. That might be something we have to look at again, just in terms of providing support and things of that nature. Some of the other positions, just to be aware of, some of the public works positions, especially that are at $10 an hour, those haven't been filled for 2 years because of COVID in particular instances. So, there's kind of a story with all these different positions. In speaking with Director Belanger in regards to library, and he can correct me if anything is incorrect or wrong, but they really haven't seen any recruitment issues. As our HR Director can attest, we have an abundance usually of applicants for a lot of our library positions, including our part-time positions. Generally, the page positions are high school kids and sometimes some retirees looking for hours on Sundays. So basically what we want to do is provide this information to the board and try to find out from the board what their policy next steps on. Do you need additional information? Do you want to prepare some sort of analysis on costs for bringing all those employees up to a $15 an hour, including potential impacts, because obviously that could have impacts on costs. It also would have impacts on, we're not going to necessarily, it's just going to be up to 15 because I'm not going to pay someone who does weed whacking around parking lots $15 an hour, and then we're going to pay someone who's collecting trash for 7.5 hours a day the $15 an hour. So there would be some other adjustments, probably beyond the people who are just making around that $15 an hour. So that's kind of my summary on where things stand. Again, if you have specific questions, we have our Director of Human Resources, Libraries, and Parks and Rec here to provide support. And I'll pause there and ask if the board has any questions or anything else we can provide.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. Would you mind unsharing the screen just so I can see
Yeah.
everybody on Zoom? Just from a process standpoint, we are not voting on anything tonight. We're not making final decisions tonight. This is a continuation of our budget workshop. So we are providing direction to the staff to put into their initial budget. We will then have an opportunity with the budget to make amendments, but it is helpful to give them the direction that, that they need to make that budget. So do we have any comments on this? I know this idea came up when we had the initial workshop. We didn't have much discussion on it. Are there any comments or thoughts on this? Commissioner Grimes?
Yeah, thank you, Vice President Gavin. Eric, I think for me and possibly for others, the bottom line, whereas, in a large sense or whatever, it'd be a great thing to increase these salaries, but the question is, one of the questions would be what this is going to do to our budget and the budget request. And looking at particularly the summer positions, at the pool, the park stewards, if we would still be able to afford the same number of people in those positions, if they were raised to 15 an hour and other positions had to be raised because of that, or, if we could afford that, or whether we'd have to increase allocation to the various departments. Budget allocation.
I mean, if you're raising the wages, I don't think this is a situation where you would raise the wages but have less people. You're just raising the wages overall.
Right.
Because as Donna can talk maybe a little bit more about kind of the pool specifically and some of their summer programs, there's a cost recovery aspect there.
Yeah.
So, from a perspective of if it's the board's policy that they want to move forward with a $15 minimum, that's the board's policy. We implement that policy. But on the backside, then there is an impact on fees for programs, playground programs, pool programs, things of that nature.
Right.
In terms of something like the libraries or public works or other areas, it just adds to those budgets of those departments. So,
Right.
We don't spend millions of dollars on part-time personnel. But especially in libraries and Parks and Rec, it is pretty significant because there's a large number of them, and in the library's case, they're working year-round.
Right, and in fact, you're right that some of the positions like swimming pools, we could increase the swimming pool fee if that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But park stewards, we don't charge for what they do.
Exactly.
And frankly, I've been concerned for years that we don't have enough park stewards as it is. So if the question is fewer park stewards, if we're paying more, or we need to increase the budget of Parks and Rec by X dollars in order to have the same number, if not more, or for any of these other departments either, I would hope that's information that would be very helpful.
Yeah, from my perspective, and what I understood this exercise to be, is we were looking at increasing the compensation for those part-time employees. There was not we have 3 park stewards now, and if we increase the pay, then we're only going to have 2. That was not what I was hearing, and nor what I was kind of thinking going forward. It was more of, is this a policy approach that the board wants to take, and then what do they do, and what will it cost going forward?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Grimes. Before I continue calling on a couple of things I just wanted to mention, I failed to mention before, this is a workshop. We usually do not take public comment, but one public comment was submitted. Jonathan Shapiro of Wynwood wrote in support of the $15, an increase to a $15 minimum wage, so I wanted to note that. Additionally, Eric, and following up on Commissioner Grimes's comment, the next step that you had mentioned, Eric, was potentially you'd have to do a pretty in-depth analysis. I presume that would take a decent amount of time to do if the board decided to move forward with this policy decision. Is that correct? You and Donna and others on the staff?
I think outside of Parks and Rec and Library, I think it's relatively straightforward. There's not huge amounts of people, and it's pretty simple math. I think in libraries, it's a little more complicated. And then I think also in Parks and Rec, and Donna maybe will want to come up and kind of talk about this a little bit more, is it gets into kind of your cost recovery. So again, we haven't had a discussion, But our past discussions on pool fees, you know, past boards, not necessarily this composition of the board, have been weary of $1 and $2 increases. You know, from a perspective of if you're going to raise those rates might change much more than that. So I'll ask Donna to kind of talk a little bit about that.
And Donna, my question was specifically like, you'd have to do some pretty in-depth analysis. It's not just, you know, the cost of whoever bumping them up and doing that calculation, correct? Like, there's an
Yeah,
analysis.
that's correct.
Okay. And my concern is if the board wants to move forward with this policy, that's one thing, we certainly should do that analysis, but I wouldn't want to tax you, your staff, the rest of staff, finance, with doing an in-depth analysis if the board's not, you know, feeling strongly about moving forward. So I do, you know, I hope during the workshop tonight, we can get a temperature of the board and saying, yes, this is something we do want to spend the time on, or no, we don't want staff to take the time on. And that to me is really the objective of the workshop tonight, to give you that direction of whether you should do that. So I don't know, if you want to add anything now, you're welcome to. If not, if other questions.
I think Eric captured
Okay.
it. It's really more of a, you know, the trickle effect of the pay increase, and then the compounding of what the actual effects would be on our residents for cost of programs to recover the additional costs associated.
Great, thank you. Are there other comments from the board? Commissioner Courtney?
Thank you, Vice President Gavin. I had a few questions around why, I assume this is only going to affect part-time workers. Are those the only workers with below a $15 an hour rate at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, so are part-time workers in the Workers Association?
Only, I believe, the school crossing guards.
School
Is that
crossing
correct,
guards.
Manager McNeely? Shaking his head, yes.
And do the school crossing guards make less than $15 an hour?
No. As they are on that list. They're over $20 an hour.
Okay. And then, I guess what I'm concerned about is I don't understand why there's necessarily this trickle implication that if you raise the part-time rate, you're gonna have to raise other workers. Because the other workers are all full-time, they're all in the Workers Association. I assume they all get.
We're not talking about full-time employees. We're talking about part-time employees. So, for example, my example was if I'm going to increase a $10 an hour person who is weed whacking and
Right.
doing some maintenance work for Public Works, I'm likely then also going to increase the pay that might be $15 or $16 an hour for someone who's doing a refuse collector, because there's a differential based upon the physical skill, the labor involved, and things of that nature. The same thing in regards to, you know, there's a page might make $12.50 an hour versus a part-time library one person who might make $15.50 an hour. You're not going to have just a 50-cent differential between them. Again, there's probably going to be a reclassification of the people on this part-time schedule if the minimum moves up to 15 an hour.
Okay, I see it now. I guess my question I'm left with then is why are all these positions part-time? Like, why do we have part-time refuse workers instead of filling those with full-time refuse workers?
Because, you know, you might have a situation where, you know, if you have 2 refuse workers call out, but you're able to have part-time staff kind of fill in various days, it's much more cost-effective for the township to operate in that manner rather than having additional full-time employees, full-time salaries and benefits, and that just helps us operate more efficiently and keep our costs down.
And the hourly rate of a full-time refuse worker is higher than the hourly rate of a part-time refuse worker?
That's correct. That's generally correct. So someone who might kind of have might have a, I'm not sure, kind of looking at David, is kind of the reference librarian or kind of the people who work in circulation. There's people who do that on a part-time basis, but there's always a differential between the part-time and the full-time.
And what's the justification there? Are they doing different jobs?
Go ahead, David.
It mostly happens with our library assistants. In the library department, we have 61 approximately FTEs, and 32 are full-time, and the rest are all part-time. With our library assistants, we actually standardized that a few years ago and brought them up to 95% of the full-time hourly rate. And that was because the full-time staff are there longer, they have a little more skills, they're doing a little more sophisticated work than the part-time staff. But the part-time staff, particularly the library assistants, are very valuable.
I have no doubt about the value of all of these employees. I guess my question is, it seems like we have a standard rate for part-time employees versus full-time employees, and so I don't know why increasing a part-time employee rate would necessarily impact other part-time employee rates, or if they're doing a job that isn't the equivalent of the full-time employee, isn't it necessarily understood that they would be making less than the full-time employee? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is this probably does bear a lot of analysis. I'm in the camp of I think we should have a $15 an hour minimum. But yes, I agree with Vice President Gavrin that unless the majority of the board wants to go in that direction, we probably shouldn't take the time to do this. As my questions have shown me, this is fairly complicated. Thank you.
Commissioner Sinai?
Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. Just some questions for Eric, I guess. And Eric, I'm grappling with some of the same complications I think Commissioner Courtney is. Can you just give me some guidance? There's not a column here for like average number of hours for each of these positions. And I'm trying to wrap my head around, the notion of a $15 minimum wage being effectively, trying to get towards a living wage for someone who's working 30 hours as a part-time employee versus a $15 an hour wage for a summer person who's working $10 a week and might just be a different kind of thing. And so I don't know enough about our part-time workers to kind of know which bucket of those two that they fall into.
If you have your budget document or you go online, every single department in the part-time salary, it will show the average number of hours per week. So that information is available. It varies a lot. I will also say it's much closer to the $10 or 10 hours a week than the 30. Most of I would say outside of Parks and Rec in the summer, because you have part-time people that basically work close to full-time hours, but only for a 2 or 3 month period of time. Most of them are probably more in the 10 to 20 hours a week range, more than anything. And we have some people, as David can attest, who basically work every other Sunday. So, it's fairly minimal. In terms of, I think that was your main question.
Yeah,
Was there another one
that
I'm
helps.
missing?
And I appreciate the information is available publicly, and I didn't go find it myself. That's why I asked you. Okay. So I'm going to, share the same thing, which is I am very much in favor of the township providing enough income to its employees to be able to live on what we are paying them, and finding a way to understand our full-time employees clearly are already in that bucket, right? So it's for our part-time employees, how many of them are piecing together 2 part-time jobs to try and make a full-time job, and we're part of that, and how many are just high school students working summers. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sinai. And Eric, I think that's a question, and I don't know if this is you or Donna or David or whoever, but are our part-time workers predominantly, are they head of households, supporting their family? Is it high school workers? Is it, who are these people?
For the library workers, the pages are primarily high school students, college students, a few older adults. But our library assistants, which actually are paid well above $15 an hour, they're currently at $24. They're, some of them are working multiple jobs because they're, on average, they are working 19 hours a week. So many of them do have second jobs.
But they're also well above the $15.
They're well above the $15, yes.
And Donna, is that same for parks where those making under 15 an hour are primarily students or retirees or?
Yeah, that's correct. The majority are students up through college. We have a handful of teachers or people that are off for the summer that come work for us, that have been with us for decades.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other comments or thoughts? Commissioner Durbin, who is muted.
Sorry about that. I'd like to speak in favor of raising to $15 an hour. And I would also like to say that I remember when I was a high school and college student and I was working in the summer, and it wasn't that I was in high school making beer money or anything like that. I was saving money for college. And you know, there are a lot of kids who are trying to put away money so they can pay for either community college or some of the expenses that they're expected to cover for college. And, you know, I don't think we should downgrade what they're doing. I also think that, you know, older people are not working for their own amusement, really. If you're buying gas, you are paying a lot more money than we paid for gas when we were in high school and college. So, you know, our wages are really not keeping up with what the current circumstances of our society is right now. And I think that we should do a more just thing of paying people. I would like to know what it would cost us. It doesn't appear to me, because we don't have that many, that it will cost us a huge amount.
Thank you, Commissioner Durbin. Commissioner Kramer?
Rick.
Yep.
I strongly favor moving to a $15 an hour living wage for all of our employees. A living wage is really long overdue, and I think it's unconscionable for us to be paying people $7.50 an hour. There are a lot of justifications for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, one of which is to provide a living wage. Another is to avoid unintentional discrimination against minorities and women. Another is to lift people out of poverty and fuel economic growth. And as Anna said, many of the students who are working are saving for college. Books are expensive, and food is expensive, and there are often college students who don't have enough food and who frequent our food pantries. So for us to say that we should be cheap with our young people is incredibly troublesome to me. So I strongly favor doing the full analysis on this and then implementing a fair and reasonable living wage as a basic minimum wage for the township.
Commissioner Kramer. Other comments? Commissioner Churchill.
Thank you very much. I have no problem with $15 an hour. It's how we get there, and I would look for some kind of gradual increase rather than some instant increase. I would also say that those people that support $15 an hour would support the tax increase and the pool and recreation fees that would accompany these raises. And I also think that when you're talking about part-time workers, you're talking about those that are most likely supplementing their income rather than providing a living wage for the family. But that said, that's where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Churchill. Any other comments? Seeing, President Bernheim.
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. One on a little bit larger scale, but I'll leave this to you, Vice President Gavin. It appears to be that there's interest in getting more data in order to make an informed decision as to what to do. And there are a couple things that just want to throw out for people to keep in mind as that decision comes forth. First is I can't see with the fog. Is that one, you may recollect when Donna Heller was making a presentation to us, she noted, as our CFO just did, that there is already an increase in the works in order to try to keep with what Commissioner Durbin was saying, which I think is the litmus test, the wages keeping up with, with reality on all of what's fair and appropriate for the job that's being done and expenses, and whether you're increasing, up to 15 from some places, or just the $2 increase that was referenced by Donna Heller. That's something that we'll have to take into consideration. And as you know, when we talk about pool fees, I always joked, and it became known as Groundhog Day. So just a quick drop of history, how that got there is that there was always the debate about raising the fees and then what that would do to the ability of people to enjoy the pool, and whether that it ought to be paid otherwise as another amenity of the township. And I recall it was consistently Commissioner Rogan and myself for years were saying, it's like the libraries. We have to pay for some of it. It's not self-sufficient. And then there were those that reminded us that when the pools were all being redone, that it was done upon a vote that they would be self-sufficient. So I pull that out here, only that I can see Groundhog Day resurfacing if there is to be an increase connected with those people who are working part-time. Is that increase to be borne by those who are using the pools or the township as a whole? Again, just points for thought that may be forthcoming, and that'll be something that will be within that additional data that it looks like that we're going to be requesting. With that, thank you.
Thank you, President
And I
Farnheim.
see
Yep.
the new chief of Groundhog Day, Commissioner McKeon, raised his hand.
Yeah, I just have one
Commissioner
follow-up
McKeon.
on that when we're looking at data. I'd really like to see either what Radnor does, Havertown, some of what of our competitors do, because this all fits into a market. So if we're paying high school kids $7.25 as camp counselors, and that's what other people are paying, that makes a little more sense to me than us raising the rate to $15 for a 9th grade camp counselor if no one else is doing it. I know that information's difficult to get, but if we can get something from the comparators, that would give it a lot better perspective for me to see how it fits into the market.
Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. Commissioner Zelov.
I strongly oppose this idea. This started in our budget workshop a few weeks ago when our Parks Director reported, she didn't ask, she reported that she was increasing pay for part-time employees in order to be able to have a greater supply, greater availability, and because that was what the marketplace was demanding, and in order to be competitive. This board doesn't set pay. This board doesn't set pay for anybody other than the manager and the secretary. We didn't set pay for our sustainability director. We don't set pay for our part-time employees. This is meddling into the work of the township management and staff. We're talking about mostly teenagers and young adults, as reported by our directors of parks and libraries. We're not talking heads of households. We're talking about teenagers and young adults, all part-time, many seasonal, high school, college students. We're not talking about something the staff is recommending or asking for. We have a policy and an approach that revenue should cover expenses for our parks programs and for our pools, so those prices will go up. Is that what we want? The pay and benefits in the township workforce are extremely competitive and meet the needs in the marketplace to attract the best people. And that's what happens with our part-time workforce our part-time workforce as well. It's an arbitrary number. It feels good and sounds good, but it's not necessary in this township. This is a solution in search of a problem. Not only do I strongly oppose it, but I don't think there's a majority on this board that says staff should spend any more time on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zelloff. Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Zelloff on this. For two reasons. What we've heard tonight, I am very sensitive to the fact that we're thinking on the wage side of issues and what $7 versus 15 versus 24 can get a worker for living wages. I understand that. But what we're not talking about is the effect on everybody else who lives in the township of the result of these, of making up for the fact that we're going to be paying higher wages to a few to the detriment of many. We will have higher fees at the pools. We will have higher taxes to pay when we have to reset our budget for 23 and 4 to accommodate an artificial number that we are only keeping up with in terms of COVID and the fact that our private sector economies have said, yes, because we have a labor shortage, sure, we can pay people starting at $22 an hour. We can't keep up with that, and it would be completely irresponsible for us to pretend that we should or could do that. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. Any other comments? Seeing none, I just want to kind of make my comment. I agree with Commissioner Zelloff that it really is staff's job, and we should rely on our staff and their expertise to do what it takes to do their job well. With that said, there is, whether it's a majority of the board or a significant, there is at least a significant amount of people on this board who do want to at least see that analysis of what it would look like if we raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour within the township. So I do believe the direction is pretty clear, Eric, that we should at least do that analysis, not necessarily put it into the budget for the November budget, but at least have that analysis ready for when we have that next discussion, so that we can review it. I know you had a couple other questions that you wanted to talk through as well.
So just a couple of other topics. And I think the remainder of these I will simply kind of speak through, and then we can handle these as a group. So when we spoke at the budget workshop, there were certain things information we had on costs, which kind of prevent us from really giving you a good look at what the preliminary budget looks like. A few things we have gotten additional information on. So we have good news on our health insurance front. We actually have a decrease in our premiums coming next year. Property liability insurance, that actually is going to be increasing, driven by the property component. Also, some of the cyber coverage that we have has been increasing. Workers' comp, actually just today got information. We're going to have a small reduction there on our renewal. Most of our workers' comp and liability costs are really related to claims, though, so those renewal dollars don't necessarily add up to 6 figures or anything of that nature in terms of the changes. It's really the claims that are the major drivers. In terms of health insurance, in a normal year, we would think that would reduce our overall expenditures. However, preliminary as we're going through our budget planning, we're also seeing actually a decrease, at least projected, based on what we know in terms of the number of people who are opting out of health insurance. So that basically means we expect to have more employees on our insurance. So those things might basically kind of counteract each other. But generally, it's good news from the township's perspective, I think, overall. Just a couple items just to kind of keep conversation moving related to the fire department. We do have the preliminary 2% increase that's in the budget at this point of time. Obviously, that will be up for board discussion during the budget adoption process. We'll provide updated information on CPI and things of that nature at that time. And then we're still working on getting those financial reviews completed, hopefully have all that stuff ready for you for the proposed budget. And then on the one additional position that I think is still undecided is that Deputy Chief Fire Officer position. There'll be a a meeting to kind of discuss that and make a recommendation, then we'll incorporate that into the budget. And finally, some other smattering of budget topics. The Finance Committee will be meeting, or has met very shortly, on the contributions for nonprofits. Their recommendation will be included in the proposed budget in the non-departmental section. Obviously, everything in the budget will be subject to any proposed amendments by any commissioner. The township engineer will look for direction on this, has requested a 3% rough fee increase for 2022. It's 2 years since their last increase. You can see what this generally would equate to. I would just kind of ask for the board's general okay. Is that something that you believe should be included in the budget at this point? Is it something you want additional detail from the manager or anyone else about, or you want to hold on that topic for now?
So I was going to say we should probably hold on that for now and talk about it during the budget discussion, unless you feel.
What, I'll tell you, Eric, what I'd like to see is there are, you note there's additional build time. I would like to know how much that has been for build time, and then if they're capable, the breakdown as to, where that time, just not a gross number, if you have it by.
So you're talking about kind of totals on build hours and such?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And if you're able to give us, hate to give you more homework, but if you're able to give us, what that snapshot has been for, the year or two prior, so we see how that's been playing out.
Okay.
And then when was the last time we put out for bid about contemplating a new township engineer?
I believe that would have to be measured in decades.
Right.
So.
Maybe that's something the board will discuss. Thank you.
And I will, obviously I want to open it up to every commissioner, but I will let Eric finish the presentation.
I just said, one other topic is, we did have a request, kind of after the budget workshop from Building and Planning regarding to the ZHB solicitor, that their hourly rate hadn't been increased, and it really was over 15 years. The amount of that increase would be a projected additional cost of just under $7,500, and that hourly rate would remain, consistent with other outside legal counsel employed by the township. Given the situation in this case, we were going to include that within the proposed budget, but just wanted to kind of alert the board, since that wasn't something that came forward at budget workshop, unless you have other ideas. So I'll pause there, and any questions or comments.
Eric, if I heard you correctly, you don't need if you got no more guidance from us at this point, you are comfortable moving forward with creating the budget and answering or providing the information you need, but.
I think the only thing that we really need direction on is the deputy chief fire officer position.
Okay,
and I think that was something the fire committee was going to work with the manager on, and speak with the fire chief and such. I think that was the.
Is that correct, Arnie?
That's right. At the budget workshop, we determined the fire committee would meet with chief fire officer and talk about the request.
And again, this committee and the board will have an opportunity to discuss all of these during the budget meeting. So we're not cutting off any discussion, obviously. We're providing direction for staff at this point. So are there any other questions or comments based on anything that Eric had shared? And Eric, if you could unshare the screen so I can.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Grimes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just really quick. I will just say I am surprised, I don't know if shocked is the word, that our zoning board solicitor rate hasn't increased in 2 decades. As someone who reads his opinions, and particularly I did when I was on the zoning hearing board, I would say, and I say this assuming he's not grossly overpaid, that he is long overdue for an increase, if that's what it takes to be competitive, because he does a great job. It's a very demanding position. So I hope at the proper time we will entertain whatever staff is suggesting for an adjustment. Thank you.
Commissioner Zillow.
Thank you, Vice President Gabbard. My understanding, having been through several budget cycles, is that our professional staff, the professionals who work for us are not staff, make a request. They don't make a request, it doesn't happen. So I imagine that's the case here. That's why it's noted that the township engineer has made a request. A year ago, they didn't make a request. Our township solicitor will at times make a request.
Right. And I don't know, forgive me, I don't know how this came about. I'm just saying that for the quality of work that Sean gives the zoning hearing board, I think that that an increase is something we should seriously consider.
I understand.
Unless he's already
Yeah.
grossly overpaid,
Yeah,
which
and
I
that-
strongly doubt.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. Appreciate it. I hope you got the feedback you need. We have 4 other items, which should be a little bit quicker. The next one is the authorization to advertise public hearings on the proposed 22 budget and proposed 22 through 27 CIP. I will start with a motion, which is to recommend to the Board of Commissioners authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise notice that the proposed 2022 budget and the proposed 2022 to 27 capital improvement plan are available for public inspection, and that 2 public hearings will be held on Wednesday, November 17, 2021 at approximately 7:30 p.m. and Wednesday, December 1, 2021 at approximately 6 p.m. Do we have a second? Great, thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any comment? Seeing none, I don't think there's any public comment on that. We will bring it up for a vote. Everyone in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed, please raise your hand. No abstentions, so I think that passes unanimously. Next item is a resolution about State Act 205 pension. I will start with the motion, and then Eric, I assume you're going to make some comments. So the motion is to recommend to the Board of Commissioners adoption of a resolution required by State Act 205, allocating pension state aid and setting employee contributions for 2022. Do we have a second? Thank you, President Bernheim. Eric, the floor is yours.
Okay, so this is an annual October item. So in late September each year, the township receives pension state aid from the Commonwealth. We received $2.4 million this year. We're allocating that between the 2 funds, the police pension fund and then the fund that covers all the non-uniformed employees. The amounts that we received in state aid is just about $492,000 less than the township's overall MMO. That basically is our pension bill for the year that we have to pay. So therefore, the township's general fund will be contributing that $492,000 difference to the pension funds. We had budgeted around $340,000 for this year, so there is an additional expense of about $152,500. Largely, that's due to fluctuations we see in state aid. So this state aid that we receive is actually funded by a tax on out-of-state insurance premiums. There's no connection to municipalities, to pensions, or anything else. It's just, this is the funding structure that Pennsylvania has. So when those numbers generally decline, the state aid we receive declines. The other component is just how many employees that we have that are a part of the pension plan. So there's a couple of different factors. The main one is the state aid decline. In 2019, we actually had an increase in that state aid, and we actually ended up paying less than we had budgeted. In 2020 and 2021, those state aid numbers have dropped, so we've had to pay more. Just as history, we paid about $355,000 in 2019 and about $518,000 in 2020. Overall, you received an email last week on the township's MMO or pension bill for 2022. Preliminarily, that number is about 4.2% higher than the previous year. The overall MMO is just over $3 million. That really gets driven from an MMO perspective, as you saw from those forms, by the total overall payroll growth. That's the form and the practice and what you have to follow in terms of how you actually build your basically your pension budget each year. It is prescribed by the Commonwealth. The other part of this resolution, or actually one other thing I'll say just in regards to 2022, the preliminary number that we have for the township to fund for pension plans in 2022 is around $614,000. Again, overall, it sounds like a lot of money. It is, but it's also less than 1% of the proposed general fund budget. And as I've said very frequently, there are 99.9% of municipalities and authorities that would trade places with us on that percentage basis in Pennsylvania. The other thing we'll also just see is how the state aid fluctuates again. If we have a situation like 2019, maybe we'll be fortunate and that number can come down a little bit. The other part of this resolution is the setting of the employee contribution rates to the pension plans. You see those in the resolution. They are unchanged from previous years. They are at the maximums according to the existing labor contracts, which go through next year. So there's nothing more really to talk about on that point. On that, I will pause and see if there's any commissioner questions or comments on this item.
Thank you very much. Before we get to Commissioner, we'll see if there's any public comment. Seeing the dozens of people in the audience, no comment. Jody, nothing online, I presume. Any Commissioner comment or questions? Commissioner Zello.
Thank you, Vice President Gavin, and Eric, thanks very much for your presentation and explanation. I just have a question on the employee contributions. I know we have collective bargaining agreements for the Workers Association and the police force that determine in those agreements the employee pension contributions from payroll. That's not the case with management and non-WA employee pension contributions. My question is not to suggest that we change it. That's not what I'm asking. What's in the resolution makes sense to me, but I just want to, I guess, ask our manager. That's up to us, isn't it?
Yeah, your non-union workforce would be up to you. Again, it would be complex because there you're adding a whole new set of payroll changes that the HR and finance would have to administer, but it is up to the board.
That's all I wanted to confirm. I'm not at all suggesting it be changed, but I just want to clarify because the memo makes a slightly different point and says it will be, but it's really up to us what it will be. Just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zello. Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Sinai.
Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Eric, this is not immediately pertinent for what we have to vote on tonight, but the email that we received said that the state pension contribution had been declining for 2 years. And I'm just wondering if there are underlying factors that you can communicate in what your crystal ball looking out the next 5 years would be.
If you have a crystal ball,
if you have any clarity into
if you have a crystal ball on how many insurance premiums will be written on from companies that are not based in Pennsylvania, then I'd be happy to look at it and see what it is. But I do have a historical chart on that. I can send that out to the board that goes back about 20 years. I can tell you that I think actually I think it goes back even longer, maybe 30 years. I can tell you that this is only the second time I think in maybe 2 decades that we've seen back-to-back decreases in this. It's called the state aid unit value, which basically gets multiplied by the number of employees by a calculation, which then gives you the gross amount. It's only the second time I've seen 2 back-to-back decreases, and the other time the 2 back-to-back decreases totaled about 2.5%, whereas the back-to-back decreases in these last 2 years have totaled about 6.5%. So it has been a larger change, but I can send that information out.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And what I'm hearing from you is that it's not like there's a policy at the state of we are going to shift more of the burden to the township. It's just been kind of circumstances the last couple of years.
The general policy guidance you generally get from people in the actuary community is you budget the general state aid at the level that you received at the previous year because you never know how it's going to fluctuate. The only time that changed is there was one year, I think 2012 or 13, where there was literally they collected 6/4 of the premium, so there was a huge spike, and they told you don't count on that. So you'll see that kind of in the information that I send out to you. But outside of that, you generally expect the same amount. And overall, there's been general growth over time. But there's nothing that leads me to believe that it's going to increase or decrease. Anything would be just a guess.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Sinai. I think you underestimate yourself. That was a very pertinent question. If the board has any other questions, pertinent or not, now's the time. Seeing none, we'll call this motion for a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none. I believe it carries unanimously. The penultimate item on the agenda is about a reappointment of pension trustee. I will make a motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners the reappointment of Barton Silverman, whose term expires October 2021, to serve the Police Pension Fund and the Employee Pension Fund as a trustee for a 3-year term expiring in October 2024. Do I have a second? Commissioner McComb, thank you. Seeing no public comment, any commissioner comment or questions? Seeing none, I think this may be a pretty easy one. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none. I believe that also carries unanimously. And our final item is a resolution about the Volunteer Fire Relief Association. And I will recommend to the Board of Commissioners adoption of a resolution authorizing township staff to disperse the 2021 Commonwealth State Aid allocation of $627,118 to the Lower Merion Firemen's Relief Association. Do I have a second? Seeing Commissioner Zeloff, thank you. I don't know if Eric or Ernie, you want to make a comment about what this is even about? And
This is annual money that we get kind of the same time as a pension. It's basically a pass-through, so the township receives the money and has a requirement within 60 days that it has to provide the dollars to the volunteer, the Relief Association. It's strictly a pretty straightforward resolution. In case any board members have any comments, I'm happy to try to answer them. This money did decline from, I think it was around 700,000 last year. I don't know if this is, I do not know the actual funding source for this, if it is similar to pension state aid. I don't know if the manager does, but it has generally been in that kind of 700 range. This year was a little bit lower. I'm not necessarily sure why. I believe it's basically based on like population and real estate and such. But again, if the actual funding source that goes into the bucket is lower, then, even if our population stays the same or other things change, you'll still get less money.
great, thank you very much. Any commissioner, no public comment? Seeing none, Jody, none. Commissioner Zeloff.
Thanks, Vice President Gabrin. I'm pleased to see this item on our agenda. Not sure that that's been the case previously. This is one of the several sources for funds for our volunteer fire service. The biggest contributor is the township. The contributions that residents and businesses and property owners make to our volunteer fire companies is a very important part of their revenue. They seek grants, but funding from the Relief Association is important and can be more important. There is a significant fund balance, and that as a funding source for our fire companies is something that is important, particularly going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. President Bernheim.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Commissioner Zeloff, and I'm also pleased to see that we put this on the agenda so people know what's going on. The Relief Association has very strict guidelines as to what the funds can be used for, and of late we've been able to see that they have gone out for some of the fire safety equipment a little bit more readily than they have in the past. We've also asked that they provide us some financial balance sheets so that we can see exactly, what they are holding. It is significant, as Commissioner Zeloff stated, and what the expenses are that are going forth. We did receive something, I don't mean to be rude about it, but big cursory overview, and have been asking for a more detailed financial statement, and we will press that. It is our obligation to press that, and we hope to have that really very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bernheim. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we will call this motion for a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none. That passes unanimously as well. And Mr. President, that concludes the business of the Finance Committee.
Well, thank you very much, Vice President Gavrin. Greatly appreciated that We have some other discussions upcoming clearly on our budget, which will happen in due course. And I just wanted to make comment to Barton Silverman. We thank him for his past service and his future service. We're really lucky to be able to tap into his expertise. With that, that will bring us to our next committee meeting. That's committee, and we'll recognize its chair, Commissioner McKeon.
Thank you, President Bernheim. There are just 2 items on the Public Works agenda tonight. So the penultimate item is at 531 Oak Road, adoption of a resolution to accept the deed of dedication of a sanitary sewer easement in Maine. So I will move to consider for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners the adoption of a resolution to accept a deed of dedication of a sanitary sewer easement and sanitary sewer main located at 531 Oak Road in Marion Station. Do you have a second? Yep. Thank you. With that, I'm going to introduce our Public Works Director, Paul McElhenney, to speak on the application.
As Commissioner McKeon has indicated, it's the dedication of a sewer main, and acceptance of a sewer main to the township. This was a single-family home that was built. There was a need to extend the sanitary sewer so that they would be able to tie into our sewer system. They went through the entire process of engineering, design, installation as per the township engineer and township policy. It has been installed and inspected throughout that time period, meets all the standards that are as needed. So from this point forward, if you accept this dedication, it will become the maintenance of mine or Public Works in perpetuity. We'll be maintaining it, but it does provide additional sewage in that area for additional homes if needed. So that's why it was a sanitary sewer main, not just a lateral, and it's very basic.
Thank you. Jody, was there any public comment? I didn't see any.
No,
So, okay.
nothing.
So no public comments. At this time, I'm just going to ask for any commissioner comments or questions. Doesn't look like there are any. So at this point, we'll call this for a motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay. Any opposed? Okay, Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. And the second item is the Maybrook apartment complex, and I will make a motion to consider for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners the adoption of a resolution to accept a deed of dedication of a sanitary sewer easement and sanitary sewer main located at the Maybrook apartment complex in Wynwood. Commissioner Courtney, thank you. With that, I'll ask our Public Works Director, Paul McElhenney, if you can please provide a presentation.
Sure. Essentially, this is the same as my last presentation. This is a sanitary sewer main that was installed to support the sewage use of the Maybrook property down in Wynwood. This is a main because it was built so that additional homes can be tied into it to support sewage needs down in the Wynwood, Narberth area. So again, this would then become the maintenance of the townships in perpetuity going forward. It has been installed, inspected as per township specs.
Thank you. And again, with this, I'm not aware of any public comment. Jody, nothing came in. Okay. Thank you. So with that, I'll ask for any commissioner questions or comments. Okay. Seeing none, I'll call this to a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay. Any opposed? I don't see any no's here or on the TV. So, Madam Secretary, that motion also passes unanimously. And with that, President Bernheim, that concludes the business of the Public Works Committee.
Thank you very much. Ed Norton would have been proud. With that, I do believe that completes the business that we have for this evening, unless there's anybody who has any announcements. Before we adjourn then, I have a penultimate announcement to see if our folks downstairs be kind enough to pull something up. Alarms and false calls, which remain at 57 plus percent. A couple years ago, we passed an ordinance trying to address this, and we were at about 50% of false alarms. The ordinance was designed to put a little penalty on those who had malfunctions that didn't do anything, and since you can't assess fines on homeowners unless they have excess of 3 in a calendar year, we focused on the alarm companies and some of the contractors who failed to disconnect at certain times. We're clearly, as this shows, not making progress. And it is an extreme problem. Think about it. Each time that alarm goes off, you have guys and gals that go to the fire station, hop onto the fire apparatus, go to the scene, and really where it is unnecessary. So we need to find ways to be more diligent about making sure that this stops. The old Smokey the Bear thing, only you can prevent forest fires, well, only we can prevent false alarms. So I call on my colleagues on any of the emails that you send out to your constituents to make note of this and try to get people to pay more attention, and then whatever creative ideas, because the ordinance isn't doing it, that any of us have, that we can stop taxing the firefighters that we so heavily rely upon, the overwhelming majority being volunteers, we come up with an answer. With that, any other announcements? Commissioner?
Not an announcement, but on the graphic, if they're very happy to show this, it's super important. Can you share the graphic with us so that we can use exactly what's on the screen?
I
Email it, or?
I will share the email that I received to all my colleagues.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out. Then that brings us to the ultimate event for this evening, and that is to thank everybody for their hard work and wish you all a good night. We are hereby adjourned.